Hello and welcome to Higher Ed Live, the live weekly web show about the world of higher education. I am your host, Seth Odell, coming to you guys on a special night and time. It is Wednesday evening, still 7 p.m. Eastern Time, coming to you with two shows this week, too. That's right. Why? Because I missed one last week. I told you guys 2 weeks ago when I was doing a show, we were in the middle of doing big TV editing for SNHU, putting the new commercial together for Southern New Hampshire University, and while it's been eating up a ton of my time, cutting into my chance to host for you guys, and while I'm just not going to let that happen. So doing two shows this week. Tonight we're doing one, and we're back tomorrow with an awesome show on parents' first-year experiences. It's a really interesting subject. It's not getting nearly enough attention, and I'm excited to tackle that tomorrow. But in the meantime, as I said, I'm your host, Seth Odell. This is Higher Ed Live. I am coming to you live, actually, from my house in Manchester, not from Southern New Hampshire University, as we usually do. Thank you guys for joining us. Tonight we're talking all about a subject that's very close to me and one that I've wanted to talk about for a while, which is recent federal investigations into the for-profit higher education industry. It is something that I followed very closely. There's a 2-year investigation that was going on that was just recently released just a little over a month ago. And to be honest, I kind of sat back for a little bit and didn't do the show until now because I was on the road producing the television commercial for SNHU. I just wasn't in a position to really absorb the literally 170 some pages this report had. It's a lot of information going on. I wanted a chance to absorb it, and I have, and I'm coming away with really, really mixed emotions. And as you guys know, I work very heavily in the distance learning space at SNHU. You'd think, and I have in the past, had very strong feelings against the for-profit industry, but I don't know, not necessarily saying things are changing, but this report brings up some really big challenges both within the for-profit industry and, well, just in the industry in general, and it's worthy of having a show to talk about it. So, without further ado, allow me to thank the sponsors that help make this show possible each and every week. We are sponsored by the fine folks over at Integral. They are the creators of the Schools app on Facebook, a private Facebook community to boost enrollment and retention. Have you seen their 2012 social admissions report? Well, if not, check it out. It's out there on Twitter, hashtag HigherEdLive. Full survey of 700 college-bound teens, all about what they care about and what they don't as far as social media with the institutions they attend. Definitely worth checking out. We're also sponsored by Omni Update. They're the leading web content management system CMS provider for higher education. The company's web CMS, well, it's called OU Campus, and it's secure, it's scalable with great tools, features, deployment flexibility, and an awesome user community. Guys, they're the best in the business for a reason. If you're thinking about a CMS, check them out. And don't forget to also check out the e-expectations of college-bound students, a great survey they sponsor each and every year as well. Hashtag Higher Ed Live if you haven't checked that out already. We are also sponsored by Converge. They're a consulting company focusing all on higher ed and measurable multi-channel marketing. That's what they do, not just higher ed, but man, they do it so good for us here in our industry. They help their clients strategize, execute, and analyze their marketing efforts. Most recently, they've actually teamed up and they're putting on a series of Google Analytics webinars, not even webinars, in-person training workshops, which is way better. Get a chance to sit in there, really meet other people with similar interests, and learn a lot. So if you're still thinking about learning a little bit more about Google Analytics, check that out. And also check out their partnership with HubSpot as well. Definitely something else worth seeing. And finally, we are sponsored by Scavenger, a Google-funded mobile game about going places, doing challenges, and earning points. Check out how one recent university recently used Scavenger to introduce their students first to campus and then the city. Really cool stuff. Great study going on out there. If you haven't checked that out, well, what are you doing? Check that out. Hashtag Higher Ed Live as well. Thank you guys again for joining me. I know it's kind of a little bit last minute. I was actually going to be hosting this at work. I didn't think I could even pull the show off until about a day and a half ago, so it's been kind of a bit of a rush. So if you guys tuning in now or you're watching the archive, hey, thank you guys for being a part of it, being a part of the conversation. As always, it's hashtag Higher Ed Live. I have the tweet deck up here. I'm happy to share conversations. Open it up, hear what you guys have to say, and let the show be as much about you as it possibly can. So what are we talking about? If you're not familiar, basically there was a report that was a process of a 2-year investigation that was released just about a little over 30 days ago. And this report is a major impact on the for-profit higher ed industry. As I'm sure you know, the industry has been in the crosshairs for a lot of folks before, and this isn't necessarily anything new, but this report was pretty damning. And the man behind it, if you're not familiar, is Senator Tom Harkin. Senator Tom Harkin has been just really hugely pushing against the for-profit industry. He's an Iowa Democrat. He's chairman of the committee for looking into higher education, and has been a very vocal supporter of increased government oversight of the for-profit industry. So he very much has his own thoughts, and again, as being chairman, it's the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. He very much feels that the federal government needs to have a larger role in for-profit higher education. And we're going to talk about why that is. But long story short is it's obviously they're the ones that are funding this. Largely, it's federal tax dollars going in, paying for students to get in. And what happens when those students don't get out? And where is that tax money going? And if it's going to for-profit companies, especially publicly traded ones, well, there's some interesting things, right? So the for-profit industry has for a long time kind of gotten a lot of flack from folks. We're going on, probably what, 5, 6, 7 years now. It's been since they first started getting hit initially with folks talking about how it was really predatory practices, that really push folks into degrees, get them in the door, drop them, really to kind of have a situation where they weren't providing students with the best possible service possible. And they're really putting profits first, ahead of student success, student completion. And this report looked at that at a much, much deeper level. Essentially, what the senator did is with a committee that took 2 years and investigated 30 institutions that are for profit. They took 15 that are publicly traded and 15 that aren't. And they essentially went into every detail they possibly could, from executive compensation to the cost of tuition to completion rates. And they analyzed all this information as well as comparing it to the traditional industry and saw where are things going, what's possibly going wrong. And I want to talk about some of the things that they found. The first one is, yes, they did find further instances of predatory recruitment, which is, again, the idea where you're really, really pushing a student regardless of fit. And a lot of times you're trying to convince students to come even when maybe they shouldn't. I mean, a story that fits with this is the for-profit industry has been kind of haunted by these documents that were floating with some universities a couple years ago that were sort of like, here are people's pain points, and here's how you can really kind of dig into them on why they have to get a degree, and here's how you can get them on the phone. And I've had a couple friends that have worked in admissions actually for-profit industries, and one particular was telling me that something that did happen, that he was told, here's a way that you can market better, especially to people that maybe are lower socioeconomic classes, and really push them and push their buttons and get them to come to school. And that's tough, because what happens is they're not going to school for the right reasons necessarily. It's maybe not a right fit. Maybe they're not ready. The institution isn't the right person to provide them with the opportunity they're looking for. And they take out loans, generally federal loans, and they go to school. And then what happens next is people don't finish. And that's kind of really at the heart of what this report found. It's something that isn't always so surprising, but is still kind of a staggering thought to think about, is how much money is going out to students that don't actually finish and get their degree. So just to kind of put things in perspective, $32 billion in federal student aid from 2009 to 2010 went to for-profit institutions for the students that are going there. And it was really an issue of retention and completion. And I'm going to go through a couple stats of the report, just things that jumped out to me. But it's kind of scary. 1.1 million students who enrolled in colleges under scrutiny in 2008 and 9, so it means ones that were investigated, had withdrawn by mid-2010. So 1.1 million students are withdrawing without finishing. And what it means, obviously, is if they're withdrawing, they're leaving most likely with debt. And that is something they're not paying back. They took a loan. Generally, again, it could be taxpayer money, essentially a federal loan. Then they are going to school, paying the school, but not finishing. And now they're still carrying that debt. They're still saddled with that debt. But what they don't have is they don't have that degree that can help them in the job market, help them find the job that's going to assist them in not only paying that debt back, but hopefully, moving up the ladder to pursuing the American dream of providing better and succeeding more. And they're not going to have that opportunity necessarily. At least there won't be increased opportunity for them if they don't have that degree, but they do have that debt. Further, in 2010, the for-profit colleges examined during this report employed 35,000 recruiters compared to just 3,500 career services staff and 12,000 support staff. So what this is getting into is talking about, so if folks aren't completing, at least for-profit students are completing at much lower rates. Why is it that they're completing at lower rates? What is it that's actually happening? Where are they actually going? What's going wrong? And kind of the big thing that this report talks a whole lot about is the fact that for-profit institutions, at least those investigated in this investigation, are just putting way, way too much money towards recruitment. And we're going to get into that in a little bit, but it's definitely something that's interesting to think about. 35,000 recruiters compared to 3,500 career services staff. That's a big discrepancy there, and obviously a lot more folks about getting people in the door. So the question is, what's the quality and caliber of the education that's actually being offered? And, it's important to look into this for a lot of reasons, and one is because people need to understand that the space for for-profits is growing so dramatically. Enrollment at for-profit schools has grown over the past decade, essentially between 1998 and 2008. It's grown from 553,000 to 1.8 million. That's an increase of over 225% in a decade. So that's a massive increase of students that are coming into the for-profit industries that are going to these institutions to try and get an education, and it's growing rapidly. And what's happening is we're not necessarily, from some institutions, seeing an increase in completion rates. And it means more and more students are taking out loans, not getting the degrees, and being saddled with that debt without the benefit of actually completing that degree and having that educational experience. And again, what this report is finding, and this is not necessarily across the board, we'll talk about a few institutions that are doing a better job, but what it's finding and what it found is that what drives this enrollment growth is heavy investments and aggressive growth for these industries. So essentially what they're saying is they're trying to grow as fast as possible. When this happens a lot of times is television advertisements, billboards, phone solicitations, web marketing. But basically that 35,000 to 3,500 ratio of marketers to career services folks, that's because there's a massive rapid growth going on in the past decade in for-profit industries. And what hasn't been happening necessarily is the same investment in the actual caliber of the education that's being delivered, or the ability of those institutions to actually provide the services that those students may need to actually finish. And that's a pretty scary thing. And it's a scary thing for several reasons. And one thing that people don't always realize that I definitely want to tackle and talk about is the issue of cost with for-profits. So when you think about this, a lot of folks don't realize that for-profit education is often much more expensive than not-for-profit education, those from your traditional institutions. And it's surprising, I think, sometimes how much more expensive it can be. At SNHU, we've been running a lot of reports. We are proud to be much more affordable than almost all of our competitors in the for-profit space in most degree offerings. And we found that it's interesting that it gets really expensive for some for-profit degrees, and the reason is an unfortunate set of market circumstances, which is especially in the late 90s, talking about 1998, the beginning of this rapid growth phase coming up until 2005, 6, 7, 8, and still today in some instances in some programs. It's about market demand, and it's about the fact that if the student is not as educated about their opportunities, they may not do the proper investigation to find out how much the degree might cost. And even if they try to do that, it's really, really difficult today, as you guys know all too well, with the federal mandated net calculators, to figure out what the net price of a degree actually is. And so what you have is a lot of for-profit institutions that provide a much higher cost for a degree, and they can make up for that simply because they are able to enroll the students through mass marketing, heavy television advertising marketing, heavy web banner advertising marketing. They drive the students in the door, and even though the sticker price is higher, the students may not know it. And also, one other key thing is the students may not have a lot of other options, especially back 5, 6, 7 years ago. The for-profits really were almost alone in this space, and it's a sad reality, and still today, that our industry, the not-for-profit inside of the house, is just beginning to wake up and see the opportunity that we have here. We were asleep at the wheel at a time when students needed to have access to education in a new, innovative way, and that was primarily online. It started, again, University of Phoenix was, I think, 73. Started as centers. It was center-based. Centers are still huge. Lots of institutions do that, where they do sort of micro-campuses in different centers around a specific region. But it grew from that to grow online. And most institutions, unfortunately, did not make that leap. And those that did were the ones that saw the profit in it. And they saw a chance to make money. Because, again, these institutions have a bottom line. They are making money. And we'll get into whether or not that's an ethical issue or not in just a little bit. But the truth is that's what they're doing. They're making money, and they saw a chance in the market to do it. And because of that, they can charge students far more than they necessarily need to. So the question is, off the bat, is the degree from a for-profit institution going to be worth it? Is it really worth the money invested? Some institutions, some situations, some institutions, yes. Some definitely not. And this report was pretty scathing, talking about some of that issue. And one of the big things, again, is that it shows that this report specifically, that for-profit schools are just not providing the support structure to help these students succeed. And that goes into the really kind of the end game for online learning, distance learning, is student success. Because the reality is if a student gets in the door and that federal loan check has cleared, what obligation do these institutions actually have? I mean, there's been some horror stories from years ago of institutions that would get people in the door, support them, call them for whatever the window is. I think it's 10 or 20 days. And as soon as that window closes, the call stops. Students stop getting support. Student can't really finish, but the check's cleared for that entire term. And they get paid, but don't have to deliver the product. And schools made a lot of money doing that, and it dropped their completion rates. And that brings up the issue of why completion rates are so important to look at. It's incredibly important. It's something I think we need to look at more. So at 15 of the publicly traded companies that were investigated in this report specifically, 55% of the students withdrew. 55%, more than 1 every 2 students that come into the 15 publicly traded companies withdrew prior to finishing the degree, compared to 46% at the 15 privately held for-profit companies. So this is even just within their space. 46% to 55% of students that come in aren't going to finish, they're going to withdraw. Now, clearly in this space, you're going to have an issue where students have a hard time finishing. A lot of times these are adult learners. Students have been out of school for a long time. They may have more challenges facing them, whether it's just simply juggling workload, family. Maybe they've been out for a long time. They may not have a strong reading, writing comprehension if they haven't been in a classroom in 25 or 30 years, perhaps. And what happens is these folks have a harder time finishing. And if these institutions aren't providing the layer of support that they need to help these students finish, what we have, again, is a large population of people that are leaving with debt. And it's just really interesting to me that there is a almost 10 percentage point difference between publicly traded companies and private held companies as far as completion rates. And when you think about that, there's one reason that jumps out to me, and that's definitely that publicly traded companies have shareholders that definitely have projected market profits, and they think they have an understanding of how much are we going to make this next quarter, and companies essentially put out, here's what we're expecting to hit, and well, what's going to happen if your students aren't hitting that? What are you going to do to get the money in the door to make it happen? What are you going to do at the end of the day? And it's something that I really do believe at the bottom of my heart with the differences between not-for-profit and for-profits. At the end of the day, for not-for-profit, the students always have to come first. And for for-profits, I really do feel that what's coming first is your shareholders. Especially if you're publicly traded, but your owners are coming first, because the bottom line comes first if people are expecting to make a profit. If you're not making a profit, you don't have to make the same decisions. I think that is actually a fundamental difference that can ripple through every decision that you make, and it's huge. It's not to say that every institution is doing poorly. I want to really stress with this report that there's some that were actually heralded for doing pretty well. And that would be Strayer, Walden, National University, and American Public University. As well, there's a lot of institutions that you guys probably know have been taking heavy heat over the last 5-10 years. You probably heard of a lot of them. Of course, the University of Phoenix, Kaplan's, the like. Well, some of them did get credit as well for doing better. Kaplan, DeVry, and the Apollo Group, which obviously owns University of Phoenix, were ones that were heralded with doing a lot more to make it better. And you've seen that with University of Phoenix. Term over term, those institutions are dropping in their student numbers. They're having less students come in the door, and that's because they're investing more in the student success process. They're investing more in providing a higher academic caliber product. They're providing more services to students. But the problem is, as an industry as a whole, not everyone is doing that. And there's still a lot of institutions that are facing a lot of problems. And it really is impacting an unfortunate population of students that already have a lot of disadvantages before them. Because obviously a lot of the students that are coming into for-profits are distance learning students that are lower income, first-generation minority. And what happens to them if these students don't have a level of experience, they don't have as much to fall back on. These are the students that have the most to lose and the most to gain. And if they're being disenfranchised, if they're being shoved out the door without a degree, not being fully supported, it's a huge impact not only on their lives, but this is what the report gets to. It's a major impact on the economy in our country, and they have to ask, is this the best use of taxpayer dollars? Going to pay for someone's degree when they're not necessarily going to get it. Maybe 55% or more than that try will not actually finish. And it's a pretty interesting and difficult conversation to have. And the report, kind of had a series of different recommendations. Just a couple things is, they wanted to tighten the 90-10 rule. So if you haven't heard of the 90-10 rule, don't worry about it. I hadn't heard of it before I started at SNHU. It's definitely something that's a little bit inside baseball for those of us in the distance learning game. The 90-10 rule caps colleges' receipt of federal aids at 90% of their revenue. So essentially it says 90% or less of your revenue can come from federal student aid. And you may think 90% is a whole lot. And it actually is, but for Apollo Group institutions like University of Phoenix, almost all of their money is coming from federal aid, and it's easy to go over that 90% mark. So putting that 90-10 rule off the bat when that was instituted put pressure on institutions to really rely on other modes of getting funding. And it kind of put pressure on them. They couldn't simply get students to take up federal loans and then cash those checks and walk away. So one of the things this report recommends is it kind of tightening that rule, maybe expanding it even farther and really seeing what you can do with it. And it also says in this report, they're asking for allowing borrowers to discharge private student loans in bankruptcy. That's a huge issue, one that you guys heard us tackle on this show before when we talked all about the student debt crisis. We had a whole show called Forgiving Student Loan Debt, but it's really an unfortunate reality that student loan debt cannot be discharged during bankruptcy. It's a huge impact on this economy. It's one that's going to realistically hit very, very hard if this is a bubble that bursts. Many people believe it is, and it's one that Congress has an opportunity now to step in and mitigate at least to some capacity, but as of yet hasn't actually done that. So this report makes a major step in saying something in this arena needs to be done. But the reality is a lot of the recommendations, and this is what's hard for me with the report, didn't really seem to go far enough, and it just said, here's a huge problem. The federal government is essentially funding a private industry that's totally ripping off half of their consumers. I mean, more or less, I'm saying this is definitely kind of ad-libbing the report a little bit here, but that was the vibe. I mean, when you hear the senator talk, there's a video up on his website giving a discussion of his past 2 years in this investigation. He's very passionate. He does speak with that kind of depth and anger about this, that federal money is going to private companies that aren't delivering products to students that need to get a better education. They're being shoved out into the world without the education they needed, saddled with debt that they now can no longer be forgiven through bankruptcy. What is this going to do to our company? How does this make sense that we spend taxpayer dollars doing this? And that's really what the report gets to, but does it go far enough? And it leaves a big question about the future of federal regulations and what can actually be done. And one big thing I'm going to throw up right now, this is kind of super, super controversial, is the reality of the fact that these federal regulations, a lot of things going on, Title IV has a lot of restrictions on for-profits, that these are restrictions and investigations only into the for-profit industry. It's obvious to anyone that obviously federal aid also goes to not-for-profit institutions as well, and a lot of those institutions also have challenges with completion rates and also have a lot of students that get saddled with debt that they can't necessarily pay back because they don't actually necessarily finish the degree. One big area that does this is community colleges. Community colleges have, in many cases, horrific completion rates. And I do think that if you put not-for-profit community colleges under the same scrutiny that you did for-profits, they would oftentimes look just as poorly. And we have to talk about that. It's the kind of thing that I feel like people sometimes want to avoid but if you put the same regulations on not-for-profits, would they be the same way? And this goes into what the reaction was from the for-profit industry when these reports came out. They came out, very strongly, essentially saying, what's going on? Why are we the only ones being investigated? Steve Gunderson, he's the president and chief executive officer of the Association of Private Sector Colleges and Universities, issued a written statement. He essentially said, the report twists the facts to fit a narrative, proving that this is nothing more than continued political attacks on private sector colleges and universities. That's their reaction. To that, I obviously say there is something to be said that this report is clearly focusing exclusively on for-profit industry, something that Democrats have very much wanted to go after, Republicans very much have not. That said, this report does not twist the facts whatsoever. Does it use the facts to support what it went out to find, which was they wanted to find if for-profit industries were providing students with the service? Certainly, but it does not twist the facts. The reality is, to the for-profit industry, if you aren't graduating your students, you have a problem that you need to fix. And if you don't fix it, there are absolutely senators out there, like Senator Tom Harkin, that are going to come for you and make sure it's fixed, or you will not get the federal aid that you are using to pad your pockets. Because again, this goes into an issue that's a bit deeper too. So where's this money going? This is money, that is literally from taxpayers going through the federal government and being paid out as student loans. And the reality is, in some capacities, it's going to things like executive compensation. We have executives making millions of dollars a year, millions. And it's something that I think is really an unfortunate part of this conversation too. You're not seeing not-for-profit institutions with presidents making $7 million. And what we saw from the for-profits years ago was that they would be giving bonuses based on recruitment goals. So you would be getting a goal, of essentially a bonus, if you actually achieved a certain level of students. And we're still, to an extent, seeing some of that in the for-profit industries today. This report pointed to some of these instances. And the reality is that's a pretty scary thing. You have people getting rewarded financially, rewarded financially depending on how their institution performs in essentially securing and obtaining federal money that students are on the line to pay back. And we are in a really, really tough spot. And this report, I think, is not surprising to anyone that read it. If you guys haven't read it, I know it's long, but it's really, really interesting. And the reason is twofold. The first off is that this is going to be one of the most pivotal moments over the next 5 to 10 years that our industry faces as far as distance learning is concerned. Right now, for-profits are the leaders in online learning. There's a reason why University of Phoenix is the largest university in the history of the world. And that's because they provide education in a way that people want to consume it, need to consume it, can consume it, are willing to pay to consume in today's economy. And our traditional higher ed markets have largely slept on this. Now, yes, they're joining your Coursera's, they're giving their courses away for free, they're playing some role. But if you're giving away a lecture online, that doesn't mean you're actually educating someone to the capacity in which they can receive a degree that can better their lives and the lives of their families. And at the end of the day, we are not degree mills, but there is a massive understanding for lots of folks, especially those that are lower income, first generation, that getting that degree is absolutely a pathway to a better life. And that is the American dream with education, and it is absolutely in jeopardy if things aren't better addressed. And we have one crossroads coming up just in a couple months, and the first one is the election. People are aware of this. I've talked about it on the show, but Mitt Romney, Governor Romney, is incredibly in bed with some of the for-profits, especially those based down in the Florida region. But he's very, very, very involved with a lot of these, and it's something that can be scary. I mean, Full Sail's been very involved in his back pocket, and so the question becomes, when someone wins the election in November, what's going to happen to this issue? Well, for starters, if Republicans control Congress, it's very unlikely that we are going to see any further investigations into the for-profit industry, obviously. They're going to say that's private sector, we shouldn't be involved in that, let's not push that any farther. Or they're going to say, and this is the card that I believe will be played, is if we're going to investigate the for-profits, let's investigate everybody. Excuse me. And the reality with that is we'll never let that happen, because if you investigated not-for-profits to the same capacity, you would have community colleges being threatened to be shut down too. And that's a scary reality. So if Democrats win, I do see that I don't believe for-profit investigations will go any further. The senator, I don't know how many more steps he really has to go with this. I see maybe a little bit of tightening with further regulations, extensions on Title IV, extensions on a few of the regulations that exist now that have deadlines where they'll actually dry out. But I don't see much further. So what happens if we don't investigate much further? Well, the reality is that we're going to continue to have students going out the door that maybe aren't necessarily having degrees. But you know what? We're having that in our industries as well. And this is a huge issue we face, and this is one issue with distance learning adult learners, that they're just going to complete at lower rates, and it's a scary, scary thought. So the question is, and I don't have the answer to this, is what do we actually do to make sure that institutions are doing their best? How do we know if they are absolutely trying their hardest to support student success? How do we know if they're not investing in that? At the end of the day, if you can make money and you can make the world a better place by educating students, more power to you. I really do believe that. I've come around a lot to believe that for-profit institutions were there when the not-for-profits weren't. They were there when there was a need and there were students and they weren't being addressed. And I think for that, they deserve some level of credit. Now, have a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them, gone so far as to make a profit at the expense of providing a high-caliber situation to a student where they can actually complete, they can actually succeed? Absolutely. Is that unethical? Absolutely, I believe it is. And if you work at one of those institutions, you got to look at yourself in the mirror when you go home every day. That's a tough thing to do if you know you're selling a dream that isn't exactly real, or at best is half empty. That said, there are absolutely institutions that are doing a lot. Kaplan has been doing a ton, making great strides in providing this. So what happens when they face regulations that not-for-profits don't? Is that tipping the scales in the market? Is that fair? Is that unfair? At the end of the day, what I'm thinking about is the students. I'm really, really focused on whether or not students are getting the opportunity to get this education, to get the education they need, and get out the door. Federal student aid plays a massive role in many people's lives in providing access to education, and it's incredibly important, I do believe, for the federal government to understand if that aid is being used properly or not. But again, how do you actually go in and know what's the interests of these institutions? What's at the core of the decisions they're making? And one of the answers to that, and this is one of the things they hit on the report that, again, was an obvious one, but is always echoed well, is discussions of accreditation. And the reality is that for many areas of our country, accreditation is at best functioning poorly and at worst possibly broken. Our accrediting agencies are in some areas very strict, some not. It's incredibly difficult to navigate. Students don't have any real understanding of what these accreditations provide. We hear all the time students say, well, isn't national accreditation better than regional? And it has to be explained, well, not really, actually. And it gets even further. I could get into a debate with someone about that right now, but I would say that regional is a higher caliber and provides you with more opportunities to transfer those credits, and national essentially just isn't as high caliber, and it's harder to transfer into a regional institution, especially if you want to go on for a master's degree. Now, students don't understand that conversation, and the question is, are these institutions that are being accredited really that different? What is the goal of accreditation? And that's one of the things that I do think about the Senator's report that really, really hit home with me, is that there's so much further we have to take this conversation, and I hope that we do actually do that. And I'm not sure that we will. Are we going to look into the accreditation agency? We're going to look into accrediting. We're going to look into how this goes farther. What happens next? And that's been kind of the conversation for me. That's just been kind of a I don't know moment. Is what's going to happen next in the for-profit industries. For myself, working at a not-for-profit institute that's providing high-quality online education at a price people can afford, I say, I have you in your sights. We are one of the first institutions finally out the gate, ready to provide the product that should have been provided for years. It wasn't, it is now, and we are here to provide a higher quality product. And I do think if other institutions join institutions like SNHU, which others are, if you see more Western governors coming out there, if you see more institutions providing online options, that I do think that we'll see a shift in market practice, if for no other reason for the fact that these institutions have to survive. And that's really important. Beyond that, I do think the federal government needs to provide some further regulations in some capacity, continue to, I think, definitely tighten the 90-10 rule, provide more restrictions, and then, for freak's sake already, allow student loan debt to be forgiven in bankruptcy. It just makes sense. and it needs to be done. And as we look to doing this, if we do see not-for-profits growing at a space where the for-profits have been, which is something that I think will be welcomed by many, including the senator, you have to wonder, though, what's the reaction going to be? Is marketing dirty? Is it dirty for us to be playing these roles where we're actually going out and we're putting TV ads on, or investing all this money? Or is it good? If we're providing a high-quality product that betters people's lives, is it our obligation to go out there and make sure they know it's an option? And that's going to be a conversation and debate that I see us having for a long, long time. Definitely in the next 2 years, that's when that's going to be happening. Because at the end of the day, it's about, why do you want to grow? You know, I'm speaking purely for myself here, but when I go into work every day, I know that I want SNHU to grow because I want people to know that they have an option that is high quality, that is affordable, that can work for them, and I want them to know it because I think it's better than the for-profits out there, and I believe we have a stronger ethical and moral obligation to our students, a stronger code behind our decisions, and I believe that students come first in all the decisions that we make. And I am not sure if that's the case for my competitors. So that's why I want us to grow. It's not for shareholders. It's not to make sure we reach our Q4 estimated earnings. It's because I want to make sure people have an option. I believe that deeply, and I do think that's important. Is why are we growing? Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to grow the size of your institution simply to make more money, are you really going to make decisions that put the students' needs first? What is best for the students? Because at the end of the day, all of these students have, well, I believe it right, but deserve to have access to education. They deserve to have the opportunity to better themselves and those they love through increasing their own intelligence, challenging themselves mentally, getting a degree that demonstrates that they have high-quality skills, talents, that they've mastered certain subject areas, and then going out onto the marketplace, into the world, in front of other jobs and employers, and showing that, demonstrating that, and receiving better opportunities because of it. A pathway to a better life. I really, really believe that education, without a doubt, is the single most transformative, powerful thing in the world outside of love. And people deserve to have access to those opportunities, and they need to have access. So whether or not it's profit or not for profit, they deserve access. The reality is, not-for-profit institutions were asleep at the wheel when students needed them and for-profits came in because there was money to be made. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's what's best for the students. So students have a right to access that. And there are for-profit institutions that have shown it can be done without sacrificing student success. Many have had to learn that lesson the hard way, and they're still learning it. But it's something that they are learning. So you'll hear from me tonight, something you probably don't hear very often, that I do believe there's absolutely a space for for-profit institutions because they are pushing our traditional, stuck-in-the-mud industry, afraid to innovate, forward. They're forcing us forward. And in the process, yes, they're making money and it's dirty, and I don't like the way it's happening all the time. And this report highlights some things that make me very uncomfortable. And again, it's worth a read just to know the realities of what's out there. But they're pushing us out there to provide a better option. So it's important for us to go out there in the marketplace and provide a higher quality, more affordable option that will not saddle them with debt that they will not be able to pay back when they can't finish because they shouldn't have been in the program in the first place or we're not providing the support that they need. Because that's not going to happen. It can't happen, and if it is, I do believe the federal government needs to be doing investigations to figure out what's going on with this money that they gave to students to go to school. Why aren't they finishing? Why aren't they completing? Why are retention numbers dying? And figure out what the problem is, because at the end of the day, we all have a responsibility. And yes, the federal government should be playing a role, if it's their money, in figuring out if we are adequately executing our own responsibilities in honoring theirs. So to that, I say that's why I found this report so interesting. I hope you guys have a chance to read it. I will certainly tweet out a link. I did so earlier. I will do so again. But that's the end of the story. So that's why I want to do the show tonight. I know it's a little bit of a high-speed ramble, but it's a really, really important conversation. Incredibly important. And I love my friends and colleagues that work at traditional not-for-profit institutions that maybe don't provide online learning, distance learning, center-based learning. But I worry sometimes that they're being left out of this conversation. And it's a conversation that should not be just between those of us that are already in the space. This is a conversation we all need to be involved in because it is about student success, student completion, access to education, and doing the right thing. And that's a conversation we should all have a voice in. So with that, guys, this has been Higher Ed Live, a special Wednesday night edition. I am your host, Seth Odell, and guess what? Well, I'm going to be coming back to you tomorrow night, talking all about parents' first-year experience. What are institutions doing? What should they be doing? What should you be doing to make parents' first year's experiences better? How can they help their students succeed? It's an interesting conversation, one I'm excited to tackle. I hope you can join and be a part of it. It's one I haven't heard a whole lot about, but you know what? Parents have a huge impact. What are we doing to make sure their impact is impactful, making a difference? We can actually help with that, and I can't wait to discuss how that works. Without further ado, this episode and all episodes are archived at higheredlive.com. Thank you guys for tuning in. Take care of yourselves. I will see you tomorrow night.